We all have our vices, that one indulgence we tell ourselves is harmless. For Alice, it was Coca-Cola. Not just a can or even a bottle, but rivers of it. What started as a childhood comfort became an all-consuming addiction, silencing the warnings of doctors and replacing water entirely. She drank 7 liters every single day, convinced it was her lifeline. 5 years later, that lifeline became a noose. This isn't just a story about soda. It's a visceral journey into the devastating, lifelong consequences of ignoring your body's cries for help. When the fizz finally faded, Alice was left facing a reality more shocking and painful than she ever imagined. Her regret wasn't just profound. It was written in the irreversible damage done to her very bones, blood, and future. Let us know where you are watching from, and what time you found this video. The sound of the fizz was more than simply a sound. It was the music that Alice's life was set to. Since the time her mother gave her that first bottle of Coca-Cola, which was a chili bottle with a caramel-colored cap. When she was a fussy child, just a sip, darling, to calm you, Coca-Cola has been more than just a beverage. Comfort, routine, and identification were all present. Is it water? The flavor was akin to nothing, a taste of nothingness. The presence of Coca-Cola was like a glass of life that was sweet, sharp, and bubbly all poured into it. Her youth was filled with sticky rings on tables and the hiss of opening bottles. Her childhood was the way it was. When she was in her teens, she consumes 2 liters of water on a daily basis. A joke was made by her friends about her Coke Ivo drip. However, the doctors quickly stopped making jokes about it. "Alice, your blood sugar is pre-diabetic," a man informed her when she was 25 years old. "The acidity is eroding your enamel," the dentist reprimanded, pointing to transparent areas along the surface of her teeth. A nutritionist pleaded with the patient, "The calcium in your bones is being diminished by the phosphoric acid. At the age of 40, you are putting yourself at risk for developing osteoporosis." On the other hand, the cautions were ineffective in the face of the raging flood of her desire. Not only was Coca-Cola a beverage, but it was also a physiological command. Whenever she awoke at 3 in the morning, her throat would be dry and she would cry not for water, but for that particular syrupy burn. If she did not have it, her hands would tremble. Until the first mouthful struck her system, she was suffering from headaches that were like bass drums. 7 liters of water per day was not an indulgence. Rather, it was the minimum amount that her body required in order to feel normal. The industrial-sized crates that were piled in her garage were continually being refilled by her, and she carried a bottle that was 2 liters in capacity, like it was an extension of her arm. Dishes were an afterthought, and they were often omitted, with carbonation serving to fill the hole. The repercussions did not come with alarms. Rather, they came in stealthily by sneaking up on people in the night. The unrelenting, gnawing exhaustion that she attributed to her job. Her explanation for the swelling ankles was that they were just water retention. It was a terrible moment when she tripped while ascending stairs, and her leg buckled with a sharp, brittle pain that wasn't quite a break, but rather a warning shot from her deteriorating femur. Then followed the insatiable thirst, which ironically compelled her to consume more Coca-Cola, which only served to make the situation even more dire. The view that is hazy. A continual tingling sensation in her fingers and toes, as if she were being pricked by very little pins. After achieving her highest consumption level 5 years ago, Alice was not just abstaining from consuming Coca-Cola. A prisoner inside the ruins that it had created of her body, she was unable to escape. It was not just one problem that was diagnosed. Rather, it was a cascading avalanche. Her kidneys had been completely destroyed by the constant assault of sugar and phosphoric acid, which led to the development of end-stage renal failure. Scars had formed on the delicate filters, which had shrunk and were working at a rate of less than 15%. The icy mechanical embrace of the dialysis machine, which she had to undergo 3 times a week for a total of 4 hours per session, had become the center of her existence. Her own organs were no longer able to execute the role of cleansing her blood, but it did it for her. Constant weariness reached the depths of the bones, dangerous and fragile. Having been subjected to a constant barrage of sugar for a number of years, her pancreas had completely lost its capacity to regulate insulin. The levels of sugar in her blood fluctuated dramatically, going from dangerously high to terrifyingly low. Injections of insulin were a continual and excruciating requirement, and even when they were administered, control was uncertain. The neuropathy that she was experiencing in her hands and feet was becoming worse. The tingling was becoming numb, which was a precursor to the possibility of wounds that would not heal, and the possibility of amputation is possible. By the time she was 38 years old, her bone density scan was comparable to that of an elderly person who was 80 years old. It was because of the persistent calcium leakage that her skeleton had become brittle and porous. That fall that occurred on the stairs? Her spine was broken as a result of compression. The danger of falling might shatter her hip or wrist, so she walked with the careful apprehension of someone made of spun glass. She was scared of the possibility of a fall. Her heart was enlarged and weak due to cardiomyopathy, which was caused by years of changing blood sugar, fluid overload caused by failing kidneys, and the direct consequences of excessive coffee and sugar consumption. Even simple activities left her panting for oxygen. She had previously taken the constant thump-thump for granted, but now it was a strained and unstable flutter coming from her. Once upon a time, the fragrance of Coca-Cola was her favorite scent, but now it made her queasy. A wave of severe and gut-wrenching sorrow was prompted by the sight of a red logo rather than a desire to consume anything. When Alice would shut her eyes when she was seated in the chair for dialysis and watched her blood circulate through the tubes that were transparent and frigid, she would see the ghosts of 1,000 bottles. She recalled the dismissive wave of her hand that she gave to the physicians, as well as the manner that she would giggle and express, "I'm okay. It's nothing more than soda." The recollection was a painful sensation that was more intense than any needle. Instead of living, she was tolerating the situation. Every single session of dialysis, every single insulin injection, and every single careful step served as a ferocious reminder of the price that she had to pay for rejecting the warnings. She was being dragged down into depths of pain that she had never imagined before, and the lifeline had turned into an anchor. It was difficult for her to go back, to hear those physicians, to taste water, and to break free from the addiction before it ruined her. Her biggest longing, which echoed louder than the buzz of the dialysis machine, was to go back. It wasn't simply the fact that Coca-Cola took something from Alice's body that I found most surprising. It was the way in which it robbed her of her future, as well as the desperate and risky bet that she was compelled to take in order to attempt to reclaim even a little portion of it. It was a sterile symphony that had become the gloomy music to Alice's life, and the dialysis room was filled with the repetitive humming of machinery. It was a mechanical lifeline that replaced the kidneys that her addiction to Coca-Cola had destroyed. Her blood flowed through tubes that were chilly and clear 3 times a week for a total of 4 hours during each session. She was troubled by the phantom fizz of soda, which had suddenly been replaced by the sterile taste of antiseptic and the coppery whisper of her own blood that had been filtered. Within the antiseptic confines of the hospital, the warnings of the physicians, which had before been disregarded as just background noise, suddenly reverberated with a terrible clarity. The repercussions were not the only thing that Alice was fighting against. She was also fighting for the prospect of a future. The battleground that was her body was. The use of dialysis was not a treatment for the disease. Rather, it was a difficult interim measure. After each session, the tiredness that it caused was so intense that it felt like a heavy weight crushing down on their shoulders for hours. As fluid was being extracted from her body, she experienced cramps that tore through her muscles. Because it was a susceptible gateway that was prone to infection, the fistula, which was the entry point in her arm, was continually throbbing. The ordinary joys disappeared. Traveling? Confined by the scheduling of the dialysis treatment? What about a whimsy excursion? The impossible. The machine and the harsh schedule of the clinic were the only things that could hold her life together. The unrelenting assault of diabetes. Keeping her fragile diabetes under control while also dealing with renal failure was a terrible high-wire performance. Her blood sugar was changed in an unpredictable manner by dialysis. Doses of insulin become a dangerous game of guessing. One mistake may cause her to have hypoglycemia shock, which is characterized by cold sweats, tremors, and disorientation. Alternatively, it could send her flying into hyperglycemia, which would accelerate nerve damage. Increasingly, she was experiencing tingling in her limbs. As a result of her inability to accurately gauge the temperature of the water, she had accidentally burned her foot when she was in the bathtub. The danger of ulcers that would not heal and amputations went from being an abstract threat to being a chillingly real possibility. At the crumbling fortress, her osteoporosis was more than simply a painful condition. It was also a persistent anxiety. Any fall, whether it be a slip off a curb or a stumble over a rug, has the potential to result in a fractured hip or a broken spine. It seemed like she was walking through a minefield as she moved through her own house. Her walk was sluggish and dragging, and she tried to support herself by hugging walls. When she was younger, she was a lady who was full of vitality and energy, but now she seems like a character from another novel. A heart that was under pressure. Her heart, which was already weak, fought against the fluid changes that were caused by dialysis, as well as the metabolic turmoil. Breathing became a frequent companion for her over these years. As she upped the solitary set of stairs leading to her flat, she found herself gasping for breath and her pulse beating violently against her ribs. She felt like a restless bird that was confined in a flimsy cage. Regarding the gamble, the nephrologist conveyed the information with a sad and serious tone. Alice, while dialysis is keeping you alive, it is not a viable treatment option for the long run, not with all of your other issues. Getting a kidney transplant is your greatest chance of survival. A glimmer of hope, both frail and scary, appeared. The truth, however, was rather severe. The fact that she had a history of non-compliance, meaning she had ignored the physicians for years, brittle diabetes, a heart issue, and osteoporosis, made her a candidate with a high risk of medical complications. The first obstacle that I had to overcome was getting on the transplant list. Finding a donor who was prepared to give blood to someone who was dealing with such complicated health problems was another challenge. The biggest risk of all was that she would make it through the operation and the harsh immunosuppressant medicines that followed, despite the fact that her body had been so severely damaged. The prolonged wait and the unseen struggle. In the process of waiting for a transplant, months turned into years. Every session of dialysis seemed more taxing. As a result of the increasing frequency of infections, she was admitted to the hospital. Through the progression of diabetic retinopathy, her vision became much more impaired. She felt as if she was being consumed by a caustic acid that was eating away at her inside. Not the pissed hiss of a Coca-Cola bottle would keep her awake at night. Rather, it was the recollection of her mother's well-meaning first taste, as well as the dismissive wave of her hand to a large number of medical professionals that would keep her awake. Just soda, she laughed at the idea. At this point, just soda had destroyed her whole life. She started to feel like a ghost in her own life as she watched her friends get married, have families, and pursue professions. Meanwhile, her world narrowed to consist of trips to the clinic, injections, and the fervent hope that she would get a phone call that may rescue her. When the phone eventually arrived in the pre-dawn hours, Alice did not feel elation. Rather, she felt a deep and shivering horror. This was the beginning of the crucible. A possible match has been found for us. Would you be able to make it to the hospital right away? There was a lengthy and difficult operation. When she was positioned, her delicate bones presented potential dangers. The monitoring of her heart has to be very careful. It took her weakened tissues a long time to mend. Her immunosuppressant medications, which were required to avoid rejection, caused her to get extremely unwell and increased her susceptibility to every germ that passed through her body. A dawn that is faint. A few weeks later, when Alice was sleeping in a hospital room that was illuminated by dim morning light, she cautiously stroked the new scar that had appeared on her lower belly. The replacement kidney, which was a gift from the death of a stranger, was functioning well. It had been years since she had experienced a calmer sensation in her body. There has been a minor reduction in the crushing tiredness that renal failure causes. She was beginning to experience a diminishing metallic taste in her tongue. But the conflict was not yet finished by any means. She did not get cured. Her transfusion was successful. Immunosuppression, a lifelong treatment. A common cold has the potential to develop into pneumonia. A cut has the potential to become septic. Masks and hand sanitizer were her regular friends, and she lived her life in a bubble of precariousness. Diabetes is still a fragile condition that requires constant and unrelenting monitoring. It was not completely eradicated by the transplant. Rather, it provided her with a fighting chance to properly control it. Damage to the bones and the heart is irreparable. As long as osteoporosis was present, cautious mobility was required. Due to the fact that her heart continued to be weak, she required medication and monitoring. It was a burden that she would always have to bear, the emotional obligation that she owed to her unknown donor, as well as the crushing sorrow that she felt for the decisions that brought her to this place. A glance was given by Alice to the window. They were free to go about, drink coffee, and enjoy their lives without being burdened by machinery or living in continual terror. A deep, bittersweet melancholy came over her, with a tremendous resolve that had been earned through a lot of hard work. She had made it through the fire that she had created for herself. By enduring suffering and making sacrifices, she was granted a second opportunity. On the other hand, the cost of those 7 liters a day could not have been covered in a single payment 5 years ago. Throughout the remainder of her life, she would use injections, prudence, fragility, and recollection to pay off the debt that she had incurred. She would do this every single day. Suddenly, the sparkle was disappeared, and in its place came the steady, unrelenting hum of survival. Which section is the most shocking? However, the punishment was for life, even when the addiction was over. And Alice was well aware that the battle she was about to engage in had just started.